memory verse even talks about that. Right? I manifested thy name unto the men that thou gavest me out of the world. Thine they were, and thou gavest them me, and they have kept thy word. So it's the idea that God's people are not supposed to be like everybody else. They're not supposed to think like everybody else. They're not supposed to act like everybody else unethically. They're supposed to act in an ethical manner, again, according to principle, but not just any random principle, but according to biblical principle. And so that's going to affect every aspect of our lives. So here we find ethics in morality in verses 20 through 35. So the rest of the chapter, all verses of morality. You want to be moral? Then you better grab on to ethics. You better grab on to those principles by which God would have you live. Because if you don't, you're going to end up like what we're going to talk about starting in chapter 7. Because it talks about a strange woman and the young man who was understanding and how he just went after that strange woman like a dog or its own. Let's use those terms, but that's certainly the picture that's laid out for us. And so he didn't grab ethics, principles by which he's living by emotion, feeling that it's dangerous for anyone to live. Any their feelings. What do you think road rage is? Road rage is somebody living according to their feelings. Why do you think you have children in Walmart who are caressing the floor while they wail at a high volume? Why do you think they do that? It's because they're living according to their feelings. And so you have it in children, you have it in adults, you have it all the way through where people have not grabbed onto ethics. They just live according to their emotions, and it just comes and goes. So they're like blowing in the breeze, just coming and going back and forth like a pendulum, and you just don't know which way the wind's going to blow. And so you have no idea what to expect of people. You know, when things happen, you have no idea how are they going to respond. I don't know. We'll see which way the wind is blowing at the time. It's sad. It's really sad that our world. So I don't know what's going to happen with this individual or this family because now this event has happened in their lives and we don't know which way the wind's going to blow. If the wind's blowing the right way, they may respond properly. If the wind's blowing a different direction, who knows what's going to happen with that. And so Solomon says, grab on to ethics. Let's read this. Verses 20 and 21. My son, keep thy father's commandment and forsake not the law of thy mother. Bind them continually upon thine heart and tie thy neck. Now, what he's saying is pretty obvious, but he's saying take hold of ethics in such a way that you refuse to let them go. But do you see what he says in verse 21? Bind them continually. I do. I mean, my kids probably think, you know, how could you possibly remember that part? They're wise enough not to voice that. So, because they like eating. But I remember did teach me to tie my shoes. You know, I was born in the age before Velcro. And so it was and you know, nobody made slip-ons for kids. So you learn to tie your shoes. It's all you could do. And my parents were so abusive to me because my mom would walk by. I had tied my shoes 20 times already. She would walk by and grab my shoelace and untie my shoe. Because practice makes perfect. And you know what I had to do? And tie your shoes. You don't, when you first begin learning how to tie your shoes, you don't learn how to tie them tightly. And they're constantly coming untied, and you constantly have to lace them up again and tie them again. That's exactly the picture he's relating here. Bind them continually upon thine heart. Do you know why? Because if we're not careful, we can grab on them the moment. We'll let our emotions guide us and direct us instead of the ethics. And so we have to keep on tying them on because they're going to work their way loose. When we lived in Papua New Guinea, we were 3.5 hours from town. Anything that we needed, we had to load in our little blue truck or vehicle we had. I'm thinking our little Toyota Tacoma. And we had to tie it in. And I'm not good at, I could tie my shoes, but tying things in so that they don't, because things are bouncing down the road, and all my good work at tying things down is coming undone. So I'd have to stop 2 or 3 times on the way home to tie things down again. And I remember one time, I don't know if Becky will remember this, but we had bought a 1,500-gallon water tank, and we bought a screen door to put on the front of the house. The tank made it home. I don't know what happened to the screen door. It disappeared somewhere along the way. And I stopped, but somewhere in between some of those stops, that door found its way. I didn't continually tie that thing down. That's what we need to do with ethics. Over and over and over. We need to keep tying it to our heart. Because it's from our heart that our actions come. That's why the ethics have to be tied to our heart, not our head. We can memorize anything. I run across people all the time. They know all the answers. They just don't live that. And so you say, this is what you should do. Yeah, I know. But then you look at their life and it's like, but they never do that. Because they got it to their head, they never got it into their heart. And so we have to continually bind ethics to our heart so that we will not let them go. Verse 22 tells us that we need to be guided by ethics. When thou goest, it shall lead thee. When thou sleepest, it shall keep thee. And when thou awakest, it shall talk with thee. When you have proper principles by which you are living, it'll talk to you. Well, I don't know what I should do. And all of a sudden, because you've continually been binding those things to your heart, all of a sudden, it's like, oh yeah, I remember now. This is what I should do. And then you think, why did I have to remember that? Because I really don't want to do that. I really would rather do this over here. Now, again, ethics applies to things, and of course, here it's talking about morality, but it applies to so many things. It applies to the way we interact with one another, but just on a personal level, personal interaction, and ethics all in that. We're not flattering each other on the other. That would be unethical, because that's not right behavior. And so sometimes when some really run us down and they drug us through the mud, do you know what we want to do? We want to return the favor. You did that to me, I'll do the same to you. But that is not ethical. And that's, again, it's not natural. Ethics are not the natural response. Ethics is the right response. And so ethics will taking the lead, where ethics says, to do, and this is how you should respond. Because it's right to bring instruction to life. Have you ever had somebody tell you, hey, I want you to do this? And you say, I don't even know what you're talking about. I remember first grade. I know, again, my children are going to be in shock the rest of the night. You remember that far back? I remember in first grade, we had moved during the Christmas break. I go to a new school with all new children and whatever. And when I got dropped off at school, I wasn't dropped off at the beginning of the day. I don't know why. And so when I was dropped off at school, my class was going to music class. I didn't even see my teacher until after music class was over. And I was already ready to go home by that time. And so we went to music class, and the music teacher was telling me, I want you to do this. So I did what I thought she was doing. No, I want you to do this. And so I did again what I thought she was saying. And she got so frustrated with me. Finally, and then it's like, oh, well, why didn't you say that in the first place? I mean, of course she was saying that in the first place, but the instruction didn't come to life for me. And what ethics does is it brings instruction to life. In other words, it lays out the example for us so that we're not left with, well, I know what I should do, but I don't understand how that would look when I'm actually doing it. I don't recognize how that would go into practice. So ethics become the essential, really, of everyday living. And without ethics, life would be a shambles. Ethics are also correcting in verse 24, because it says, to keep thee from the evil woman, from the flattery of the tongue of the strange woman. And so what ethics does is it guards us. It's a guard against error. It's a guard against sin in our lives. So the principles of biblical ethics take us far from the evil woman, and they cause us to turn a deaf ear to the flattery of the strange woman. Now, in verses 25 through 35, we see pushing aside morality. And that's what the strange woman is looking to do. But what happens is that ethics dictate the reaction of the heart. Again, because if we have bound ethics continually upon our heart, ethics can then dictate the reaction of the heart. But if we just know it in our head, then when we react from the heart, having it on our heart, but ethics will dictate the reaction of the heart. You see that in verse 25. Lust not after her beauty in thine heart. Wait, who are you to tell me what to do in my own heart? You can't see my heart. You know, that's a really popular statement. You know, you talk to people about sin and the fact that they're a sinner and they get mad. Well, only God can see my heart. You can't see my heart. You don't know my intentions. You don't know my motivations. Well, it doesn't matter. I don't have to see your heart. God said we're all sinners. So whatever your intention was, whatever your motivation was, really is totally immaterial to the conversation. God said we're sinners. But the thing is, what he's doing is saying those ethics, even the reaction in the heart. You know what we think. Well, I was thinking it, but I didn't say it, so it's okay. And do you know what this tells us? This tells us you better control what you're thinking. And the only way to control it is by applying ethics. And of course, The only way really to do that is to be truly and totally yielded to the Holy Spirit of God. Because we can learn all the book learning we want to, but without the power of the Spirit of God in our lives, we're not going to be able to apply ethics 100% to the extent that we need to. It takes God's help. So, as we go on, we also see that ethics inoculate against the wiles of lust. 25, it says, neither let her take thee with her eyelids. What is she doing? She's batting her eyes at you, trying to get your attention, trying to, hey, look at me. And yes, that is what girls do. That's what ladies do. All you have to do is see a commercial on television. What do they do? They're using a girl that bats her eyelids and, hey, I'll like you if you buy our toothpaste, whatever. But, whatever it is they're selling, because they do that with everything. Everything. They inject it with that. But when we have continually bound ethics to our heart, it will inoculate us against that. And so we can see it, we can recognize it, and then we can say, well, that was a temptation waiting to happen. So let's go on. And let's talk about the fact that ethics guard against the destructive nature of morality, or rather of immorality. And you see that in verses 26 through 35. In verses 26 and 27, we see this strange woman's destructive power. So let's read that, verses 26 and 27. For by means of a whorish woman, a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Now those two things actually do go together. They seem like, it's two totally different things, but they actually do go together. We'll see that here. One thing I do want to mention about an adulteress, Solomon is not calling someone names. What he's doing is being honest. This is a whorish woman. This is an adulteress. He's just being honest. And we ought to be honest. Sometimes, we are so, we have so much pressure put on us to be dishonest. In other words, don't tell the truth because it might offend somebody. Don't tell the truth because it might hurt someone's feelings. And Solomon's saying, no, it is what it is. You realize that if we placate everybody and play up to people's feelings, we will never. Oh, but if I were to tell them that their thinking in this area and their action in this area and their motivation in this area is sin before God, they would be offended and they won't listen to the gospel. But let me tell you something. If they never recognize that those things are sin before God, they'll never know that they need a Savior. So we cannot play games with people and say, well, I'm not going to say what I know to be true because I'm afraid I'm going to offend somebody. Then you know who we're being unfaithful to? Well, I'm just being a friend to them. But we're being unfaithful to Christ by being dishonest with our friend. And how much of a friend are we when we lie to them about what they are and who they are before God? To be dealt with. And when we play with people and we play patty cake with their sin, they think their sin is okay and I don't need God. And whose fault is that but our own? And we will answer to Christ for that. You remember what Paul said? He said, wherefore, knowing the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. In other words, I know what the score is. I know that people are going to stand before Christ as sinners. They're going to be guilty before Him, and they're not going to have any sort of defense. That's what Romans 3:19 tells us, that every mouth may be stopped and all the world may become guilty before God. And yet we play with people. Well, I don't want to tell them that, they need to come to Christ because they're a sinner. I don't want to tell them that because then they'll be turned off from the gospel. Well, they're already turned off from the gospel. I don't know what you're thinking you're doing. Thinking that. You're not helping anyone come to Christ by playing games with them. And so Solomon here, he's not playing games. He's just telling it like it is. Again, not to be mean, not to be hurtful, just to be honest. And it's time for us, if we're going to be ethical, we're going to have to learn to be honest with people and stop playing games with their sin and pretending like their sin is no big deal, just they need to believe in Jesus. Well, look, they need to believe in Jesus because their sin is a big deal. And that's why they need the Lord Jesus Christ. I know, that's a rabbit. I recognize them when they run across the trail. But nonetheless, this is an important thing for us to learn as God's people. We try so much to be kind to people because that's one thing our world doesn't have. Our world doesn't have kindness. But what kind of a kindness is it to lie to people's faces and to tell them or to act as if their sin is really no big deal? That's not a kindness at all. And when we stand before the Lord, I think we'll recognize that. And certainly, as we are observers at the Great White Throne Judgment, we will certainly see the fallacy of that. As we see those very people with, and that we refuse to be honest about their sin because they might be offended, and we see those very people cast off into the lake of fire for eternity. You say, well, you're being kind of hard, aren't you? Well, don't you think eternity in the lake of fire is kind of hard? I'd rather people not be there. But that's exactly what's going to happen if we fail to be honest with people. So Solomon, he's being honest about the whole thing. But you see the destructive power that this woman has. So what he says is that poverty is going to come to those who fall prey to adultery and fornication. And on the flip side, you have the strange woman who only sees her lovers as a trophy to be stuffed and added to her wall of accomplishments. Again, she has no concern for the wealth. She's just after the next conquest. Usually guys are cast in that role, and certainly guys are in that role from time to time. But there can be some ladies that really get into that sort of thing as well. And so ethics will guard against that. We see the spouse's destructive power in verses 28 through 35, where the spouse denies innocence. Verse 29. Well, let me read verses 28 and 29. So it says, can one go upon hot coals and his feet not be burned? So he that goeth in to his neighbor's wife, whoso toucheth her, shall not be innocent. So how many guys, when they get caught, say, well, but she tempted me? Pull that one. Again, it's one of those where you want to respond, you want to be really carnal and respond, I may have been born at night, but it wasn't last night. You just, my sarcastic nature just bubbles to the top in a situation like that. Well, it's not my fault, but you were involved. You were a willing participant. Nobody held a gun to your head and said, you will be immoral with this woman. Nobody did that. Oh, no, it wasn't me. Or like we were talking about last week, well, I did it, but that's not really me. So that was a hologram? It wasn't really you. I mean, it's just lunacy is what that is. And so when the spouse walks in and catches the man and woman in bed, other man, and the guy says, hey, this wasn't me. It was all her. What do you think the guy's gonna think? I mean, we know what the guy's gonna think. He's not gonna listen to any defense. He's not gonna listen to that at all. Verses 30 through 32, we see that the spouse's destructive power also denies understanding. In verse 30, men do not despise a thief if he steal to satisfy his soul when he is hungry. But if he be found, he shall restore sevenfold. He shall give all the substance of his house. But whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. He that doeth it destroyeth his own soul. You see what happens? Again, if someone is hungry, we would say, well, it's not right. What they did isn't right in that they stole, they from the store because they're hungry. They don't have any food in the house. And so you'd say, well, it's not right, but I understand why you did it. We might, have some compassion on them in a situation like that. But in this, the husband has no understanding. Nope, give me any excuse you want. I'm not going to listen to it. Sort of a talk to the hand moment. And maybe more talk to the hand moment, depending on who the husband is. But it denies understanding. And really the adulterer shows no understanding in the fact that he got involved with somebody else's wife. I mean, that's true. But then, of course, the spouse is not going to show any understanding when he finds out about it. Oh, I understand you have your needs. No, I don't think so. I mean, that's what our world really tries to promote. But there is no understanding of it. There just is not. Then we see the spouse's destructive power in that it denies reason. Verse 33 through 35, a wound and dishonor shall he get, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. For jealousy is the rage of a man, therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will not regard any ransom, neither will he rest content, though thou givest many gifts. You can reason with this spouse who's been wronged. You can reason with him all day long. He's not going to listen to it. Do you realize what Solomon's saying is, be ethical. Look at all the things you can avoid by simply being ethical. Because, none of this is a situation any of us would want to find ourselves in. So nothing can be done in this situation to restore the old pre-adultery relationship and reputation. Once it comes out, it's almost impossible to rebuild your reputation. And if the two guys were friends before, for them to be friends after, that's going to be quite unlikely. So again, ethics, that's the thing that we need so that we can avoid all of this. Because you go back to verse 24, talking about the ethics, to keep thee from the evil woman. That's what's going to guard against all of these things it talks about later on. Keep the ethics. So what we find about the principles of ethics is that, about a couple of weeks ago, suretyship, co-signing is to be avoided because by it, poverty and ruin are often brought into families. Secondly, we see that poverty and want will come on those who are slothful, those who refuse to wake up, those who refuse to be self-motivated, and they refuse to do their job. Then we see that the froward man who devises mischief will certainly fall into mischief. And then adultery and fornication are to be looked upon with utmost dread and detestation as sins that impoverish as well as enslave men. It debauches their consciences, threatens death, and brings infamy to their character. So in the end, what do we find? We find Solomon there exalting ethics. Do the right thing. Continually upon thine heart. You do that, and it'll keep you from all of these things that he